Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchbaugh, host of People Solve Problems, and we have two special guests with us today, Don Kieffer and Nelson Repenning. Don and Nelson, welcome.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Jamie. Great to be here.
So these are two people I've known sort of independently, but for quite a long time. They collaborate with the company ShiftGear. Also, more importantly, this book, There's Got to Be a Better Way, which is a great title because, of course, there's got to be a better way. And we'll get into the book here in a second. But just to make this a little personal, Don and I go, I'll say way back, well over 20 years. Spent a lot of time inside companies leading transformation at executive level, Harley-Davidson, Intermatic, and has since taken those lessons to consulting. But we got to collaborate during that time. And as I was reading the book, hearing stories about some of your work, I felt a little bit like reading my own, not my own biography, but like I was looking in on some things that I got to experience. And then when I got to the acknowledgments, you had this very nice note to me in there, which I greatly appreciate. It was noteworthy for me. So thank you for that. And Professor Repenning was teaching systems dynamics. I was a huge interest in systems dynamics. And when I was a student at MIT, I was one of your first students. And I really enjoyed the class and was glad to be part of that and have followed your writings and research ever since. And I think it's a fun collaboration between the two of you in what I think you've explored this, I'll say this, with fresh curiosity. Challenge assumptions, challenge traditional idealism around some of these ideas, which I think brings it to some unique takes. So I'm excited to get into the content on that.
Great. Well, thanks, Jamie. Let me return the favor of the compliment, which is after I had a year and a half with Mr. Oba, learning from Mr. Oba from Toyota when I was at Harley. And the goal there was for me to understand the thinking. I wanted to be able to predict the next question he would ask, because I knew I could never be as skilled in manufacturing, but I wanted to understand the thinking. And once I did, and we kind of outran the way he was working, which was you have to follow these rules and do this, whatever, use all these Japanese words, and we parted ways. The next person I ran into who understood the thinking, which there were very few in the country at that time, back in 2000, 2002, I think, was Jamie Flinchbaugh. And you came and you helped me put it. Working at Harley, it was hard to use a lot of Japanese language, so you can imagine. So we turned it all into very accessible, straightforward stuff. So I want to thank you for that. And it's been great to work with you over all the years.
Yeah, it was fun times. So as I kind of realized I made this bridge only now is you approached it with fresh thinking, curiosity, challenge assumptions. So you cover 5 principles in the book. I'll very quickly read them: solve the right problem, structure for discovery, connect the human chain, regulate for flow, visualize the work, and we'll come back to those. But I wanted to first ask how you derived those 5. Was it more you started with 30 and you boiled them down and figured out what they were? Or did you find yourself just repeating the same phrase so many times and went, hey, maybe that's a principle? How did you get to these 5?
So I could start, and Don could definitely jump in. I often liken the work I do to being a stand-up comedian, which is, you write a few jokes, you start on the Monday night open mic night, couple work, couple don't. Then maybe you move to Thursday night, and then you're doing the weekends. And then, only after years do you do your HBO special, after you've sort of perfected your act. And I think for us, at least my experience of it was, I think we had the pieces and the tools long before we had the big picture and could put the whole puzzle together. We could go through our notebooks. I think the principles went through many different incarnations. And probably the last one was, for a long time, we had 4 principles. And then visual management was like a tool to apply the first 4 principles. And we got so caught up in our shoelaces trying to keep that distinction that we finally gave up and said, no, there's 5 principles. So I think they really emerged from, almost 30 years of conversation. And then each time we would teach it. So, doing our act, you're exactly right. Some things would resonate and some things wouldn't. And I think they got cleaner and sharper as they went. And I remember for a long time, we didn't have a name for what we called this thing. And we had 50 of them on my whiteboard. And finally, I was like, why don't we just call this dynamic work design? It was like, but all of that just came from doing the work and the kind of ongoing interaction between the academic perspective and the practitioner perspective that Don embodies.
Yeah, the other aspect of it is that we didn't get this from reading a lot of case studies and studying companies. We did it from doing the work over 3 decades. And I remember that the first set of principles for me, I did at Harley when Jim McCaslin, the president, said, Don, we love your work, but you're so far ahead of everyone. No one knows what you're doing. We can't see you. You're scaring people. Can you sit down and tell us what you're doing? And that was a tough deal for me because I could do it, but try to describe it was very, very tough. But I did. I came up with, 4 ideas. I called them principles, and I sat down with all my colleagues, individual. You remember all those executives. But I showed them to Nelson, and I'm the junkyard dog factory rat, and he's the disciplined, rigorous academic. And he looked at me, he kind of smiled and said, well, that's nice, Don, but these aren't really principles. And that started our journey of like, okay, let's keep looking at the work and teaching and going through this kind of back and forth between, as MIT says, hand and mind. And I think Nelson is exactly right. They emerged from that back and forth over decades till we got something we felt was really right.
Yeah, Don and I have spent a lot of time on factory floors. I always say if I wanted to create a scented candle, it would be machine oil mist. That would be.
I still love that smell whenever I go in a factory.
Oh, I love it. Just brings back so many memories. So let me go into the first one, talking about hard gaps to close, solving the right problem. When I was at DT Energy, we did a deep study. We talked to hundreds of people throughout the company about what the problems were in the organization. The executives said these were the top 10, but the organization doesn't get it. The organization said these are the top 10, but the execs don't get it. It was actually the same 10. It was the same list. And it just seemed like finding the right problems, talking about the right problems, settling on the right problems seems so elusive in organizations. People get really angry at others in the organization for not seeing the problem that they think is obvious. So why is that so elusive to kind of hone in on what is collectively the right problems to solve?
So I think for me, and Don can give the more practice-oriented perspective, the big breakthrough for me is I was starting to dig into the psychology of safety for some work that we were doing in the energy industry, and came across an early version of this sort of model that we have 2 ways of thinking, conscious and automatic, which then Dan Kahneman really, I think, nailed in the, thinking fast and thinking slow. But, once I kind of got on that, it helped me explain exactly that dilemma, which is, when we're sitting in the conference room and we're using our conscious cognition, we can talk big thoughts about what we're doing. But when you're on the shop floor covered in the machine mists, right, we tend to devolve to that automatic processing. And so it just helped it snap into place for me that, we needed a method to get people to slow down and use a little bit more of that kind of logical way of thinking to break exactly that impasse. And then suddenly, why did we need an A3 or why did we need structured problem solving or Tomaic or whatever? Like the lights went off, like, oh, this is the why behind why these tools really work and why you need to use them correctly and not just a sort of rote application where you're going through the motions, which I think contributes to the failure modes you were just describing.
Yeah, for me, it's you're successful when you're a problem solver. That's how I was successful. And you train yourself to get to the solution quickly. And the more experience you have, it just becomes normal for you. And you can't understand why when you propose to do something, people don't immediately see how you got there. So we're just jumping to solutions. And we go through all that math almost subconsciously, and then we're throwing solutions at each other rather than trying to verify the problem statement. And I think the other aspect is that, especially at work and organizations, we look at people. So if a problem shows up, no matter what are all the conditions that have been going on for a long time that produce that problem, we tend to focus on the person nearest that problem and blame them. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And anytime someone does a deep study on a problem, they always find all these contributing factors. But where you're in the crush, it's like, why didn't Don get this or fix this fast enough? He missed it. So I think those two things, mostly the speed, is how we screw it up a lot based on our strengths. And the stronger the problem solver you are, the more quickly you can get to a pretty close solution. But it takes time to actually sit down and think about the data. And that's what all those methods, the one we use, A3 or DMAG, all this stuff, they force you to write it down and think about it. I think that slowing down feeds back to Nelson's point about the other part of our brain, this system one of our logical thinking. But to stop and get that is hard for people. There's such a crush of time that you just want to press forward.
Yeah. That's and this is probably the fifth or sixth time that Daniel Kahneman has been referenced in the podcast. It's really an important book for the idea of problem solving and that slowing down early, right, in the front end of problem solving. So to the point that we're busy that you made, Don, I want to go to structure for discovery. We are busy. We already have, everybody will say, I already have plenty of problems to solve. Why do we want more? Why do we want to create work so that more problems come to the surface? If we already have enough and we're already overwhelmed with problems, why do I want more? Why do I want to make so many problems so visible?
We're not making more. They're already there. And I think the mistake we make intellectually is we're separating innovation and finding new methods from doing the existing work. Because actually a problem just shows a weakness in the system. It's an open door towards there's something to learn here or something to fix. And when you add all up, create this constant engine of closing those doors and going through those doors to figure out what's wrong or where the opening is, that's when innovation happens. And also stability. When the system is running in a more stable way, you have more time to think. So I think that's why it's important. And that's why it's the structures for discovery, not just for getting the work done, but as we're doing the work, we have to discover new ways. It's by doing the work that you see where the weaknesses and strengths are, and you can move it forward. But only if you have a structure and a culture that encourages you to take the time to do that.
And the thing that I would add to that, Jamie, is that, when I started System Dynamics, you were a student in my first class ever, right? We were developing all these tools to help people understand the complexity of their environments better, right? So we were building models and flight simulators and maps and causal diagrams. And the uptake of that 30 years later has been challenging. I think it really works well in some contexts. But I think one of the things that we realized is you can work against the problem from the other direction, which is rather than helping people understand the messiness of their environment, maybe just structure the environment so it's a little cleaner. And I think structure for discovery is all about, let's just get the right metrics in front of people so that we share those, recognize it's a social process so that we have to ask questions. And then I think the other one, and this is something that, I've really learned from Don, that the wisdom of it, I think I see more every day, is get people to be explicit about what they're actually going to do. And it goes back to what we were just talking about of, okay, you tell me the problem, and then I just kind of go off in automatic mode. And if I make people just write down, okay, here are the activities we're going to use to go solve the problem, Post-its or checklist or whatever, I think people discover almost immediately that they don't even know what they're doing, right? Because it's become so automatic. And so I think that principle, Don and I often joke, when we started teaching the class, we thought it was kind of a throwaway relative to the other ones. It was sort of almost a warm-up. And I would say the students get as much action out of that as any of them in terms of just the ability to find easy wins in their organizations.
Yeah, that's great. And I like the idea, the invitation for innovation. And that leads back to the dynamic part, right? Is you don't know next week what that invitation will be. So you kind of have to be prepared for it, right? And as those invitations happen, we jump in as we can.
The important thing, Jamie, just let me add one more. I think for me is I started working on the shop floor, running machinery, and ended up as an executive. But I think for me, one of the critical things for leaders is paying attention to those openings and those issues keeps leaders in touch with the reality of getting the work done. That's where you can see internal or external things emerging, a slight shift in the sales of the market, a slight shift in the skill set or the technology that's happening that gives an advantage. If you're paying attention, you can see it when it's small, and then you can take it to scale. You don't have to wait for it to show up in a big magazine article in 5 years after it's been commercialized. You can see and take advantage of it more in real time. And I think being more connected to the work is a serious issue for leaders.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very serious issue. We've all tried to solve. Another favorite quote of mine is farming. I think it was Eisenhower. Farming looks mighty easy when the cornfield is 1,000 miles away and your plow is a pencil. And yeah. Where's the work happening? That's where the real challenges exist. So to that point around people doing the work, there's a lot of folks that do this kind of work that you've immersed yourself into, that will make it, I'll say, either all about the people or all about the process. And so, it's not really process over people. I think sometimes that's the approach people take, but it's really process for people. And with people, engage, enabling people. So you talk about connecting the human chain into the work, into the process, into the improvement. Why can't we just, I'll say, design a robust process and let the process do the work? Why is connecting the human chain into the work so vital that it makes your 5 principles?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think, and this is something that the folks at Toyota, I think, understood very well in their context, which is humans are really good when stuff goes wrong, right? We can talk about the impact of AI on work and so on and so forth. But, one of the big insights I think Don and I had that led to this principle was, we started to ask the question, which is, what is a meeting good for, right? If you and I are going to take the time to have face-to-face communication, where should that go in the process? And, it doesn't take a lot of digging into the literature to realize humans are really good at processing uncertainty and ambiguity, and we do it best when we do it face-to-face, right? And so suddenly face-to-face communication becomes a really powerful process element, and you want to make sure you put it in the right places, right? And I think once we kind of got that, we realized that so much of what we do in contemporary organizations is exactly backwards, right? We have long meetings where we look at PowerPoint slides, and then we use Slack messages to kind of process the associated uncertainty, which is probably 180 degrees out of phase with what you would want to do. And so I think, to the earlier conversation, the reason you need people in there is no matter how much time you spend designing the process up front, you're not going to get it perfect, right? And you probably wouldn't want to get it perfect because you're not getting that innovation and engagement. And even if you get it perfect for a couple of days, the market of the technology is going to change. And it's the human connections that are the most efficient and effective way to process all those little gaps and changes. And, for my money, I think we're a long way from AI being able to, process all of those. We can come back to that a little bit later. But it's really about, if you and I are talking to each other, that's a really high-powered moment, and we want to make sure that we take advantage of that.
So I would say anyone who's been frustrated by a call center where the person you're talking to, you're trying to explain your problem to, is reading from a script, and your problem's not on that script, knows exactly why we need people in the process. You can automate some things. For example, your paycheck, we don't need to have a meeting. If you're working a job and you're on a salary or whatever, you get your paycheck automatically. We don't need to have a meeting about it. It's we could just make a calculation. We call that a handoff in terms of human communication. So that stuff is good for AI or the call center with the script. But when there's a problem or a decision to be made, there are a lot of intangibles that those scripts don't include. And that's where we need our brain and all our experience and problem-solving skills to boil it down to what's the problem, to get the clarity, relieve the confusion. And that's, as Nelson said, that's what humans do best. And a lot of that principle is about getting those, we call those huddles, by the way. It's like a huddle in football. It's what are we going to do next? As opposed to getting your paycheck, which is a handoff. So the real part of design of the work when it's a human system is getting those handoffs and huddles in the right place so the work flows where it can flow, and it stops and gets a huddle and a problem solved where that needs to be happening.
Yeah, I love that. And I like referring to problem solving as a contact team sport. which means it's not passive, right? And it requires more than one person. You come together and do it better. The opposite of that, I still remember first time I heard somebody say, "Send me your data, and I'll tell you what the answer is." And like, well, that's not the same.
Or my favorite is, can you send me this slide, slide number 17 or something of your, been working on this project for 3 years. Someone just wants a slide deck, then they think they can do the work from that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, well, just watching time here, I want to maybe skip to visualize the work and talk about that a little bit. And in visualizing the work, I think the hardest part of this is knowledge work, which is where you spend a lot of time on in the book. We always say, when a process is broken in manufacturing, and to see more of the problems, it's harder. There's a lot more nuance there than people sometimes think, but at least, a piece of equipment's broken down and nothing's moving. It's pretty obvious, right? But knowledge work can be hard because we can always jump into more work. We dynamically reprioritize on the fly. If I can use my next hour any way I want. So what makes it so hard to visualize the work and in knowledge work, and how do people just get started on that?
Well, let me start on this, and Nelson, you can fill in. One thing, what is work in knowledge work? In the factory, it's pretty clear. You get a piece of metal, you have to cut it, or you get something, you have to assemble it. But in the office, work can be, hey, Jamie, can you go get this piece of information from me, which disrupts whatever you are doing. So the intellectual work, one, you can't see it, and two, it's so easy to change and overload people because if you're the manager, you keep asking for the next thing you need, but you never really get a visual of how much work is actively in the system. So what we do is not just map out the process, we map out where is the work in that process, is it moving or not? And when people see a big pileup of work in one place, everyone goes, oh, we have a problem. Where before you could say, well, Don, just work, just do it faster, like just you get through it. Or on the other side, the people will say, oh, I'm really close. It's just, I'll just be another day or two. But you can't really see the work piling up like you can in a factory. So I think visualize the work to us as a way of seeing the active state of the work, not a process map, and certainly not just a dashboard, which says, oh, we're 40% done. I don't care how much done. What's happening now? Where is the work? Where are the issues? And what do we need to do now? So I think that way of visual management is much different than some people think when they just, oh, we have a dashboard or we have a visual, but they're tracking lagging indicators. They're not really looking at the work in a way. Making it visual, Jamie, turns on all the things that people in factories have been able to do naturally for a long time. See a pile of work or machine stuff, go fix it. So we structure that visual the right way. The same thing happens in intellectual work.
Yep.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, one of the little teaching gambits that we use all the time is, and I have a class of executives, I'll say, if we have 50 executives in the room, for sure, one of you, someone that works for you at this very moment is getting stuck, right? The piece of work they're doing, they're missing a piece of information, they don't know how to solve a problem, blah, blah, blah. And as you pointed out on the factory, right, the equivalent of that is a machine breaking, you're probably going to know right away, or at least very quickly. And I always ask them, so when are you going to find out about that person getting stuck? And, it could be a half-hour conversation about the psychology of, well, I don't really want to tell my boss because he's going to get mad at me and I'm an expert and I'm supposed to know this. And I'll bet if I just sleep on it, I could figure it out. But then the next day, I realize I should have told him yesterday. And so now I really want to solve, and, this could go on for a long time. I remember I had a student at Harley working with Don in 1 year and just counted the average time required to solve a problem. So from when the problem was discovered, when did you solve it? And basically, the average time to solve a problem was equal to how many months were you away from product launch. So what it meant is on average, every problem was solved at the product launch, which probably wasn't quite true. But the point is it didn't really matter whether you discovered it 2 years out or, 6 months out. It took about 2 years or 6 months to get the problem solved. And that's because of all these hiding dynamics that, and I'm sure both of you are cringing because of the dysfunction that you can imagine that creates. And so I'm think
still cringing because it was happening to me, Nelson.
Yeah, right.
Dysfunction.
And so any method that I think can help people see the stuckness sooner is going to help you enormously. And I think one of the things that Don and I have been shocked about is that when you use these techniques in knowledge work, which is so rudimentary compared to what happens on the shop floor, Post-its and whiteboards and markers, the gains are enormous, but it's because no one's ever really thought this way before. And I think people don't appreciate the cost of the dysfunction that they're caught in every day. Because that's just, knowledge work is messy. That's how stuff gets done. And so there's often kind of shockingly big wins out there that from really simple techniques to have what Don described as that kind of real-time update of just where is the work in the process right now.
Well, one of my favorite things I do when I teach is I ask executives if they can draw the organizational chart. Oh, sure, we can draw it. That's a static thing. It doesn't move. I say, okay, now can you draw the chart of how a piece of work goes from an idea to a product, intellectual or physical, and passes through all the functions and people in the organization? And they go, yeah, but they can't. They draw rainbows. They draw houses like we work as a family. They draw scrambled eggs. They can't really draw how the work happens. And that's a revelation to them, Jamie. They think they know it goes to finance, but they don't really know how that piece of work goes to the organization. And that's a design issue. And it's a big one for leaders who think it's up to someone else. It's not, it's up to them.
Yeah. I think that's great. That, again, the ability to draw the picture of it shows that we understand it at a structural level, at a dynamic work design level. And yeah, we in terms of getting stuck, I used to joke that I'm a recovering engineer. And I think one of the aspects of that is, an engineer isn't really stuck until somebody takes the work away from them. We'll just keep going forever. But that leads to that dysfunction. So I appreciate the advanced reading copy. As this episode's coming out, the book is launched, and encourage people to pick up a copy, read it, and more importantly, apply it. So thank you for both coming on to share your perspectives.
Thanks for having us, Jamie. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you, and thank you so much.